It began on a cold red-eye flight bound for Washington, D.C., the kind of quiet night sky where stories no one expects are born. Seat 11A was occupied by a man in a worn janitor uniform, his hands still marked by cleaning chemicals, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. He wasn't anyone special to the world. Just another single dad, just another face in the crowd. But fate doesn't always need fancy uniforms or medals to choose its heroes. The flight attendants moved softly down the aisle, dim lights glowing as the passengers drifted into sleep. But in seat 11B, a man in a crisp Navy uniform struggled to rest. His name tag read, Admiral T. Reynolds, and despite his rank, the weight he carried was heavier than any star pinned to his chest. His mind was lost in reports of loss, men he'd commanded, families he'd written letters to, and missions that had stolen sleep from him for years. As turbulence rocked the plane slightly, the Admiral stirred. He leaned back, eyes closing for just a moment. And before anyone noticed, his head gently fell against the janitor's shoulder. The man in 11A froze, unsure of what to do. A Navy Admiral, sleeping on him. He glanced down at the man, saw the deep lines of exhaustion, and simply sighed. "Rest easy, sir," he whispered. "You've carried enough." The plane flew through the night, and for once, both men slept, one from duty, one from fatigue, but neither realizing how much they shared in silence. When dawn cracked through the cabin windows, the Admiral awoke suddenly. Realizing where he was resting, he sat upright, embarrassment washing over him. "My apologies," he muttered, straightening his uniform. The janitor just smiled kindly. "No need to apologize, sir. You looked like you needed the rest." The Admiral studied him for a moment, his calloused hands, tired eyes, but calm presence. "You serve, don't you?" he asked quietly. The janitor looked out the window. "Used to," he said. "Air Force. Maintenance crew. Lost my wife in an accident 6 years ago, raising my daughter alone now. The cleaning job keeps us fed." Something about his tone, humble yet strong, hit the Admiral harder than he expected. He'd met decorated officers, brilliant strategists, fearless soldiers. But this man, there was something different. Something pure. When they landed, most passengers hurried out. The Admiral stopped at the terminal, still thinking about that simple man. He turned to see him pushing a small cleaning cart toward the exit, same quiet grace, same humility. And something tugged at the Admiral's conscience. A week later, fate intervened again. The janitor, David Miller, was cleaning the Navy headquarters hallway floors when he saw a pair of polished shoes stop in front of his mop bucket. He looked up, and froze. Admiral Reynolds stood before him, eyes warm but serious. "Mr. Miller," he said, "I've been thinking about that flight." David straightened. "Sir, if it's about honor," the Admiral interrupted gently. "And forgotten service." He invited David into his office, a room lined with medals and photographs, but one that felt strangely empty. They talked for hours. About service, loss, purpose. About the difference between commanding thousands and cleaning floors to raise a little girl alone. And by the end of that conversation, the Admiral wasn't talking to a janitor anymore. He was talking to a hero who'd been hiding in plain sight. Weeks later, an official ceremony was held at the naval base. David arrived nervously, not knowing why he'd been invited. But when he saw the Admiral on stage, he knew something was coming. "Ladies and gentlemen," Admiral Reynolds began, "heroes don't always wear uniforms. Some serve silently, long after the battlefield forgets them. Some fight wars at home, with loss, with responsibility, with life itself." He turned, locking eyes with David. "One such man sat beside me on a flight not long ago. I rested on his shoulder that night, but in truth, I leaned on something greater, his quiet strength." Gasps filled the room as David was called to the stage. The Admiral handed him a folded flag, a symbol of service, and said, "This is not for what you did in uniform. This is for what you continue to do, for your daughter, for your integrity, and for the kind of courage the world rarely sees." Tears welled in David's eyes. He looked around at hundreds of officers saluting him. The janitor who mopped their halls. After the ceremony, his daughter, just 10 years old, ran up to him, hugging his leg tightly. "Daddy," she said through tears, "are you famous now?" He smiled down at her. "No, sweetheart. Just finally seen." The video of the event went viral. People from all over the world commented, saying how they'd been moved, how they'd remembered their parents, their struggles, their sacrifices. In the end, Admiral Reynolds and David became close friends, proof that respect doesn't flow downward or upward, but both ways when hearts meet. The Admiral often said later in interviews, "That flight taught me something the Navy never could. Sometimes the strongest shoulders belong to the quietest souls." And David, he kept cleaning floors, but now, people saw him differently. Not because of the medal or the attention, but because he reminded everyone that dignity isn't in what you do, it's in how you live. So, if this story touched you, if you've ever felt unseen, unappreciated, or just tired from carrying too much, remember David Miller. Remember the Admiral who slept on his shoulder. And remember that even the quietest acts of kindness can echo far beyond what you can see. Like, share, and subscribe, not just for the story, but for every unsung hero out there who deserves to be seen. Because sometimes, the world changes with something as small as a shoulder to rest on.